when you're not tapping into 50% of your population for the ideas, for the innovation, for the perspectives, I mean, we all miss out. And there's a historical gap to be addressed where every country legally discriminates against women. Every country, including the United States, all of the wealthy countries. Women don't get as much funding. I think a big part of it is that the training, the access to social capital networks, that hasn't existed really. I think Technovation is the only global program that is all about sort of building these skills and that self-efficacy, but also building the connections and the global network that gives access to finance and all of that.
With a background in aerospace engineering, Tara Chklovski is the CEO and founder of Technovation, a global nonprofit empowering young women to tackle real-world problems through technology and entrepreneurship. Since 2006, Technovation has been driving over 400,000 girls to build skills in coding, AI, and business. Today, Tara will share her wildest prediction to us and explain how technology and education can spark positive change, especially in underrepresented communities. Welcome to the show, Tara. What is your wildest prediction for the future?
My wildest prediction is that the next Microsoft will be started by a 17-year-old girl.
So tell us more about Technovation and what it does and also what it doesn't do.
So we are the largest, you can call it an accelerator, and for young girls, age 8 to 18, where they really go through an exact accelerator experience where they work in teams, they work with a mentor, they find a problem that they care about, and then launch a tech startup with users, develop a robust business plan, get to pitch it to VCs, and then they come, you can call it like a demo day, where we fly the finalists from around the world to Silicon Valley. And we just had our World Summit last week at NVIDIA. And so we've been doing this for the past 15 years. And so we've seen a lot of changes in Silicon Valley and in technology, the mobile wave and now the AI wave. I love your question about what we don't do. I think what we don't do is we're not a coding program where it's about teaching children how sort of the nuts and bolts of technology. I think what we are in the business of is really the entrepreneurial mindset where find a really meaty problem that you can sort of build your life around and then go make a huge change in the world. So I think the accelerator part is really the part to focus in on.
And is this designed to kind of replace formal education or to be done to augment? Or is it just a completely different thing?
I think humans spend roughly 20% of their time in a formal learning space. So it's a very small fraction of our lives. And I also feel like teachers don't have that much time to do these kinds of things. I mean, you still need to teach a lot of the basic stuff to students. So we rely heavily on educators to bring these kinds of programs to students, but we are no way thinking about replacing anything. We are working to bring our curriculum into the classroom because boys and students can really benefit from this real world problem solving mindset. There's a real question of what humans are going to be doing. And I think it is going to be solving some of these really complex social problems where you actually have to get out and talk to human beings and work with one another. So I think it's a very close collaboration with educators in schools.
And your organization focuses entirely on young women. There's a sort of obvious question there, really, which is, what's that about? Is it about kind of fairness? Is it a belief that women are just better at doing this stuff? Like, what was your kind of motivations and rationale behind it?
I think the fairness part is the real motivation, and also sort of a missed opportunity for communities, right? Like where when you're not tapping into 50% of your population for the ideas, for the innovation, for the perspectives, I mean, we all miss out. And there's a historical gap to be addressed where every country legally discriminates against women. Every country, including the United States, all of the wealthy countries. So I think it doesn't serve the country well when you're not leveraging the brightest and the best people that you have and the potential. So I think that's where this is coming from. But like I said, the curriculum is so powerful that everybody can benefit. And that's why it's open source, completely free for everyone to use.
I mean, at the moment, when you look at the numbers, it does appear that fewer women obviously go into this direction. They find it harder to raise money, it seems. It seems like they raise less money and then they normally have smaller exits. To what extent is that a kind of definition of the problem? To what extent is that just the kind of nature of the industry? What do you think is the main sort of problem to address with this? Is there a demand issue or a confidence issue, or why are we facing this situation?
I think social stereotypes are at the bottom of it. Very, very deeply rooted social stereotypes, right? So you have, and the social stereotypes don't also work for men that well, right? Like where the stereotype of women are the carers, nurturers of the family. And then the other stereotype is that men are the power hungry, money hungry, aggressive. And none of those stereotypes are really true for everyone. And it doesn't serve us that well either. But I think that the first step there is I think just kind of education. And there's a very positive trend overall where with more information, we become more empathetic to the other side, the other person's story, right? So I think there's progress there. It's very slow because I think these stereotypes are so deeply ingrained. And so I think both sides have to sort of acknowledge it. And it's not just a workplace issue as well, right? It completely bleeds into the family situation where the working mom is supposed to do more of the child rearing, education, and there's this allocation of responsibilities. And we saw that in COVID where women scientists who had children who were married to male scientists, they took on all of that at-home learning responsibilities for their children, and they did not publish. And the male scientists who had children, they published much more. So these are highly educated women, scientists, top of the game, and they also don't have the confidence and courage to sort of push back against these social norms. So I think that it's a very, very complex, multi-layered problem, but I think it can be solved, and I think we are working towards it. So you mentioned women don't get as much funding. I think a big part of it is that the training, the access to social capital networks, that hasn't existed really. I think Technovation is the only global program that is all about sort of building these skills and that self-efficacy, but also building the connections and the global network that gives access to finance and all of that. I'm hoping that we are a very big part of that change story. Our goal is to reach 25 million young women, to have the largest network of young women, tech entrepreneurs and investors. But I think we need everybody else to also sort of be part of that change where you're having these conversations where these roles that are prescribed don't necessarily bring out the best in each of us, right? So,
what was it that made you kind of span the worlds of technology and sort of entrepreneurship at the same time? Because it seems like quite often these things are kind of set up as technology boot camps or coding workshops or something. And to sort of marry that up with entrepreneurialism is quite interesting because, from afar, it looks like those are quite different skill sets.
It's an incubator, right? Where that's exactly what you're doing, where you're trying to incubate the next wildest tech startups. So that's what the connection is. But my friend, her name is Anu Tiwari, and she had run the first version of Technovation, and it was inspired by Startup Weekend, which was these weekend hackathons where you're building a startup. And so the insight was we should do this at a much larger scale at a younger age so that girls are much more inclined and understand the nuts and bolts of what does it take to start a company. And guess what? That was what was needed, because these young women have told me that they would never have thought of launching their company if it wasn't for Technovation. So you're absolutely right. It's usually the coding education is very, very kept siloed. And you have many entrepreneurship programs, but rarely are they brought together. And I think it's because technology drives most of them. But countries that have embraced it, their GDP rises so much because it's the fastest way to a higher income, higher economy, all of that.
It seems like it's very much a global program.
Yes, 120 countries, yeah.
Yeah. So when you kind of run something like this across so many different markets, what are you seeing at a kind of macro level? What are the kind of differences in the types of companies that people want to set up in different countries at the moment?
I think a lot of it depends on the income level of the country, and also because these are companies started by young women, and what are the socially acceptable areas for them to be operating in. So across many countries in Africa, we get a lot of apps around smart agriculture, smart or access to weather data for agriculture purposes, because a lot of women are directly involved in agriculture. So that is one thing that's very, very interesting. Definitely in low-income countries, access to health, mobile health, telehealth, and even before sort of AI sort of burst onto the scene, chatbots was a really big thing. And so now, of course, it's become even bigger with LLMs. And then you see in higher income countries, there are more sort of first world problems. And interestingly, the innovation comes because of the challenge we put to the girls, find a problem that impacts a lot of people. And so the global majority lives in a very different kind of way than the global minority. And so the tenor of this program pushes you to tackle large social problems, right? And so they fall under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, like no poverty, no hunger. Lots of innovation just from the fact that these are teenage girls, and teenage girls are early adopters of technology. So we had an Uber-like app developed by a team from New York in 2010. So this was before Uber became known publicly. We had an incredible mental health app developed by a team in San Jose in 2012. And so this is 12 years before all of these conversations happened, like, oh, you need to block this, you need balance, you need meditation. And so it's fascinating to see what teenage girls are how they're using technology, how they're using AI. We just had a team of girls from Hong Kong create an app that was kind of like very interesting. One of the girls, her grandfather passed away, and her grandmother had a very hard time moving on. And so they created this app called Stand By Me, where it is using old videos and photographs of the grandfather. They made a completely new persona that's helping the grandmother move on. And so it's new generated content and language. And so I don't know how that made me feel, but it's just very, very interesting to see how girls are thinking about it. We had a team in Vietnam. These are girls who I think belong to an orphanage. They were surprised that a lot of the facial recognition apps do not recognize Vietnamese facial expressions. And so then they built their own data set and trained it on their own facial expressions. And so I was like, that's very, very interesting. And so I wouldn't say there are trends across countries, but there are more trends across socioeconomic status. And
from a distance, it kind of seems like there's almost been two phases of startups. The ones for the first sort of 10 years of the internet were very much around an opportunity. So as people kind of seeing blockchain or seeing Web3 or, seeing 3G and then thinking, what can we possibly make around this that solves my personal problem? And then more recently, I've been much more enthused by people just looking at the world and looking at how people live their lives and then trying to figure out how to solve the bigger problems that really matter. In a world where AI could be part of that solution, where GPS could be part of that solution, but it always seems to be a more thoughtful and kind of empathetic approach. And I try to be clumsy. I try to be careful to not make clumsy generalizations about gender, but it does appear that sometimes the people that live the most in technology don't always have the best possible vantage point to understand the problems and the opportunities that normal people have. So it's interesting to get some sort of wider thinkers in a way.
Yep.
What challenges have you had running and scaling the program so far?
I get that question a lot, right? And I have such a hard time answering it because I see it like if you're doing something with your hands and if you're building something, right? Or if you're painting, and you make a mistake, you kind of just fix it, you debug it as you're going along, right? And I see this as that, right? Like you constantly hit roadblocks, but I don't sort of see them as roadblocks. You just got to get over it, right? Like, but then some are, of course, big. And we just recently released a report. It's kind of ranking countries by how well they're supporting their women in tech, and where are they ranking in terms of their AI preparedness in terms of how many women are in their tech workforce. Because many countries say, oh, we're adopting responsible AI policies, but they don't really have a plan for building an AI skilled workforce. And so there are about 9 countries where their number of tech professionals is declining. And so how can you be how can you sort of be AI ready when your tech workforce is not there? So anyway, so that has been a huge learning experience to build that, to get that data, and then to deploy it at a global scale.
Have you kind of started to see that almost every idea being pitched your way is a kind of AI-based idea, or
Yes.
a little bit?
Yes.
And people mostly kind of looking at it in a very sort of positive way.
Young people typically look at things in a positive way. And so I want to stay very closely connected to young people. There's a huge difference between how young people think and how, I don't know, like 30-year-olds and above think. I think that, interestingly, many of the tech companies that support us, many of the employees have very negative views of AI themselves because they don't understand how these technologies work. I think from the government side, there's just tremendous fear because politicians are almost the last to sort of get their hands dirty and actually play with these tools. And so I think there's these pockets of and camps, and there's a lot of work to be done to get the adults less afraid of these things and understanding the nuts and bolts of how they work.
It's been weird for me sort of attending a few tech events recently where actually, again, these are the clumsy generalizations, but people who are older and have been in technology longer seem to be rather worried about the impact of AI. And they'll kind of precede presentations from young startups that are obviously doing amazing, positive, wonderful, abundant things with AI. So for the first time ever, I'm seeing the industry almost sort of bifurcate into people that are enthusiastic and those that are somewhat fearful. What are the sort of plans for the organization as it goes into the future? Like, is it looking to scale into different markets, to take on board different types of entrants? What's the plan?
Yeah, I think our goal is to reach 25 million girls over the next somewhat like 10, 12 years. So a big part of what we're trying to launch next year is the largest AI accelerator for women. The goal is to reach about 2,000 women, give them like a crash course in using climate data science to understand like how they can train an AI model, and then open it up and say, build your next AI startup, and then ideally connect them with funding and get them to sort of take it to the first stage.
It's always interesting to kind of think in terms of social norming in a way, and how when paths are shown to you by people that have kind of walked down them before, it kind of very much clears the way for people. And then what was a kind of miraculous, risky, exceptional path becomes something that's just part of the options that people consider. So I guess kind of coming back to your wildest prediction as we kind of wrap up, do you think there's anything kind of structural or societal that's stopping, young women from selling their companies for billions, or is it just a matter of time?
I think structurally is that the most VCs are not that open to considering this, right? Because you can see that in how they are funding, and it's in the single digits is the percentage of women getting funded for their tech startups. So I think there's a very clear problem there. But I think it's changing because there's a lot of women VCs, right? And so I feel that as that's one way to do that. And then that's a faster way to do that, I think. And in parallel, as those investments show that they're making a lot of money, money is a very powerful motivator. I think everybody will sort of jump in and say, and I think AI really changes a lot of these things, like access to these very powerful models, right? Like well, of course, you should launch a company tackling women's health, right? Like, I mean, that's 50% of the population here. So I feel like some of these things make so much monetary sense that I think with such powerful technologies, the argument is much quicker and cleaner to make that you're missing out on this economic opportunity if you don't fund just because the founder is a woman, right? So I think education is helping, but more of it would be great. And so that's why I love this podcast. So thank you for featuring us.
Tara, thank you very much for coming on the show.